6G, we have to leave the world.
Winning a Grammy was an absolutely surreal experience.
Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. As always, we have a packed show for you with all the top news stories from around the world. Let's get started with our big focus tonight. The US presidential election is now days away. And while one would expect the political rhetoric to get shriller, Trump has taken things to a whole new level with his invective against immigrants. The former US president is unapologetically tying his bid to win a second White House term to the strong anti-immigrant sentiment prevalent in the country. However, his tirade and that of his supporters is not confined to simply opposing illegal immigration. It's now an unabashed, bitter, racist, xenophobic outburst aimed at instilling a strong anti-immigrant fear in Americans. While addressing a massive rally at New York's Madison Square Garden, Trump doubled down on his promise for a massive deportation program on day one of his new term to reverse what he described as an immigrant invasion into the US. Even as his campaign team and his allies defend him against his Democratic opponent, Kamala Harris, calling him an unhinged, unstable fascist and a wannabe tyrant who admires Hitler, Trump's Sunday rant, analysts say, qualifies as possibly the most vitriolic campaign speech in modern US history. Trump said the United States is an occupied country. And before the Republican presidential nominee spoke, some of his top supporters hurled extremely racist and vulgar rhetoric. Former congressional candidate David Rem called Kamala Harris the Antichrist and the devil, while others lashed out at Hillary Clinton's illegals and homeless people. Comedian Tony Hinchcliffe called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. As his opponents turned up the heat, the Trump campaign later disavowed this line, claiming this joke does not reflect the views of President Trump or the campaign. Much of Trump's speech was peppered with falsehoods and exaggerations. It was the kind of rhetoric that the Harris campaign believes could prompt moderate voters, fence-sitters and disaffected Republicans to Harris. But is this a huge risky gamble by Trump? Analysts argue this rhetoric could very well scare away a significant segment of the Trump support base that otherwise agrees with his brand of hardline politics. Some American analysts have gone as far as to say that Trump's blistering anti-migrant rhetoric is the most extreme form of demagoguery ever witnessed in American history. Trump also took sharp jibes at the Biden-Harris administration on the issue of the economy. Tapping into the frustration of many Americans who are struggling with high grocery prices despite cooling inflation, Trump said, "I'd like to begin by asking a very simple question. Are you better off now than you were 4 days ago? I'm here today with a message of hope for all Americans. With your vote in this election, I will end inflation. I will stop the invasion of criminals coming into our country, and I will bring back the American dream." He also said he would push for a tax credit for family caregivers who take care of a parent or a loved one. This comes after Kamala Harris unveiled her own platform proposing that Medicare should cover home health care. Trump said, "If Kamala Harris gets 4 more years, our economy can never recover. If I win, we will quickly build the greatest economy in the history of the world." The former president rooted his first presidential campaign in 2016 on inflammatory rhetoric about Mexican migrants. Now he's suggesting that migrants are directly to blame for Americans' economic frustrations, an argument often used by far-right leaders throughout history. While Trump's rant sounded quite ominous, it was the opening acts of the New York City rally, a mix of donors, entertainers and MAGA politicians who unleashed an 11th-hour campaign furor that prompted angry rebukes from Democrats and some Republicans as well, who are now worried that the vengeful show would hurt their standing with moderate voters. The rally began with Tony Hinchcliffe, a comedian and podcast host, assailing Puerto Rico in a city that's home to the largest Puerto Rican population on the US mainland. About 500,000 Puerto Ricans also live in battleground Pennsylvania, where Kamala Harris campaigned on Sunday. The comedian said, and I quote, "There's a lot going on. I don't know if you know this, but there is literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. I think it's called Puerto Rico." The line was well received by Trump supporters who filled the historic arena in Midtown Manhattan. Trump has recently taken to calling the US a garbage can for the world when he rails against undocumented immigrants. Hinchcliffe went on to say, "These Latinos, they love making babies too. We just know that they do." Harris's campaign seized on these comments, quickly clipping the video and posting it on social media. The vice president then visited a Puerto Rican restaurant in North Philadelphia, where she discussed her vision for the island, along with plans to lower costs and create opportunity in Puerto Rican communities on the mainland. Republican Senator Rick Scott of Florida, whose re-election campaign depends on sizable support from the state's Puerto Rican community, joined the backlash, saying it's not funny and it's not true. Puerto Ricans are amazing people and amazing Americans. Another Florida Republican, Representative Carlos Gimenez, a close ally of Trump's, blasted the remarks, saying this is not a joke, it's completely classless and in poor taste. Tony Hinchcliffe clearly, definitely doesn't reflect my values or those of the Republican Party, he said. New York GOP Representative Anthony Despacito, who's facing a competitive re-election, also responded by saying, "I'm proud to be Puerto Rican. The only thing that's garbage was a bad comedy set. Stay on message." Meanwhile, Trump, who was introduced by former First Lady Melania Trump in her first speaking role at a rally this election cycle, largely stuck to the script, including his now common assertion that his political rivals represent a traitorous enemy within. "We're running against a massive, crooked, malicious leftist machine that's running the Democrat Party. They're smart and vicious, they're the enemy within, and we must defeat them," Trump thundered. Another speaker, radio host Sid Rosenberg, attacked Hillary Clinton, the Democratic nominee from 8 years ago, by hurling vicious abuses at her in words that we cannot repeat on this show. Rosenberg then turned his attention to migrants now living in New York City and his fury over the local government's attempts to feed and house them. He said, "You've got homeless and veterans sleeping on their own feces on a bench in Central Park." And then he went on to hurl more cuss words. There are around 36 million Hispanic voters eligible to vote in the American election this year, according to the Pew Research Center. They have generally formed a key plank of the Democratic coalition, but Republicans have been eating into that support. Could this nasty invective by Trump and his supporters change that? Meanwhile, Elon Musk, who's openly supporting Trump and also raising funds for him, has refuted claims that he worked illegally in the United States in the 1990s, following a report by the Washington Post suggesting that he lacked the required legal status to establish the company that made him a millionaire. The report was picked up by President Joe Biden during a campaign in Pittsburgh. He slammed Musk for hypocrisy, stating that wealthiest man in the world turned out to be an illegal worker here. "No, I'm serious. He was supposed to be in school when he came on a student visa. He wasn't in school though. He was violating the law. And he is talking about all those illegals coming our way?" Musk hit back, saying the Biden puppet is lying. Moving away from the shrill rhetoric of the campaign, a new survey has suggested that 61% of Indian Americans will vote for Kamala Harris, while 31% will support Donald Trump. According to the Indian American Attitude Survey 2024, conducted by Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in partnership with YouGov, there's also worrying news for Democrats. There's a dip in the Desi community's support for the Democratic presidential candidate compared to 2020, when 68% of Indian Americans backed Joe Biden, and an increase in the support for Trump from 22% 4 years ago has now gone up to 31%. There is a dip in the number of Indian Americans who identify as Democrats from 56% to 47%, and those who lean Democrat from 66% to 57%.
This is it. We're getting to the end. With his third straight U.S. presidential campaign coming down to the wire, Republican candidate Donald Trump has mused at rallies about hydrogen-powered cars exploding, getting spray paint off limestone, and marveled at how billionaire backer Elon Musk's rocket had returned to Earth in one piece. He's complained about Democratic rival Kamala Harris's work ethic, praised Chinese President Xi Jinping, and taken aim at Harris's celebrity supporters.
And we don't have Beyonce, who couldn't fill the arena last night.
And Trump has been making headlines in ways that have nothing to do with how he would run the country ahead of the November 5th election. He turned one rally into an impromptu dance party.
Let's go nice and loud.
Shared a locker room tale about golfer Arnold Palmer, and cooked French fries at a McDonald's.
We're going to put it right here.
A consistent theme of Trump's rallies is the false assertion that in 4 short years, Democrats have transformed the nation into a dystopian state. But his unfocused behavior and unusual rhetoric risks alienating some voters in a race that remains so tight that any swing of a few thousand votes in several competitive states could determine the next president. Here's the Brookings Institution's Elaine Kmark.
He's sort of guaranteeing a solid 46 or 47%. But there's also over 50% in polls who say they wouldn't vote for him. So he's really turning off the very people, the small percentage that could put him over the top.
A spokesperson for Trump's campaign said the former president's method conveys important stories and helps explain policies.
You know, I do the weave, right? Always a weave, right? And always end up in the right location.
But it's also giving the Harris campaign ample ammunition.
And it is clear he has become increasingly unhinged. But the last time, at least there were people who could control him.
Trump has adopted a more frenetic campaign schedule, with time growing short, recently holding events in 6 of the 7 states likely to decide the election. A recent Reuters Ipsos poll showed Harris leading Trump nationally by a marginal 46% to 43%.
And I'd like to begin by asking a very simple question. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I'm here today with a message of hope for all Americans. With your vote in this election, I will end inflation. I will stop the invasion of criminals coming into our country. And I will bring back the American dream. We need the American dream to come back home. This will be America's new golden age. It's going to happen quickly, too, very quickly. Every problem facing us can be solved, but now the fate of our nation is in your hands. Next Tuesday, you have to stand up and you have to tell Kamala Harris that you've done a terrible job, that crooked Joe Biden has done a terrible job. You've destroyed our country. We're not going to take it anymore. Kamala, you're fired. Get out, get out. You're fired. And I'm announcing a new policy today that I will support a tax credit for family caregivers who take care of a parent or a loved one. It's about time that they were recognized, right? They add so much to our country and are never spoken of, ever, but they're going to be spoken of now. Thank you all very much. The United States is now an occupied country, but it will soon be an occupied country no longer. Not going to be happening. Not going to be happening. November 5th, 2024, 9 days from now, will be Liberation Day in America. It's going to be Liberation Day.
Is Gen Z in the house? Who's voting for their first time in the first election? All right. Now here's the thing I love about you young leaders. You know, you are rightly impatient for change. You are rightly impatient. You who have only known the climate crisis, you are leaders in what we need to do to protect our planet. You who grew up with active shooter drills, you know what we have to do to fight for safety in our schools. All right, so everybody's here because you're prepared to do the work. So you who right now know fewer rights than your mothers and grandmothers understand the importance of fighting for the right of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government tell her what to do. And this is why I love you, the young leaders who are here, because for you, this is not theoretical. This is not political. This is not about some debate. It is about your lived experience. And you are here, and I see you because I see your power. And you are here because you know your power. And I am so proud of you. And everyone, let us applaud our young leaders, our first-time voters. Let's applaud them. Let's applaud them. Let's applaud them.
You're being taxed. All government spending is taxation. So whether it's direct taxation or all government spending, it either becomes inflation or it's direct taxation. Your money is being wasted, and the Department of Government Efficiency is going to fix that. America's just not just going to be great. America is going to reach heights that it has never seen before. The future is going to be amazing. You guys are awesome. Honestly, this is like... Yeah. I mean, this is the kind of positive energy that America is all about.
All right, let's take a quick break here on Global Lens. On the other side, we're going to discuss with our guests just how this campaign is shaping up with the presidential election now just days away.
Joe Biden is not going to be the Democratic presidential nominee.
I made my choice. Kamala Harris. She's experienced. She's tough. She's capable.
I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
I am the one saving democracy.
He has tapped into the fear and anxiety about demographic change in the US.
This polarization in the United States. Some people are even suggesting that there could be a civil war.
You are this unable to solve your own domestic problems. You have no right to claim to be anybody else in the world, and we're moving into a multipolar world where the United States will not lead.
This and more. Streaming on News9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Hey, why are so many lights on? Is it Navroz?
Settling accounts, uncle?
No, writing a love letter. Check your accounts every day and ensure there is no mismatch. Exchange sends trade-related messages daily. Do timely verification. And if there is a mismatch, inform the exchange immediately.
So much good, so much good. Invested good.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's go across to our panelists to discuss the latest on the US presidential elections. Joining me on Global Lens tonight is Vivek Mishra, Deputy Director of Strategic Studies Program at the Observer Research Foundation. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Nirmal Abraham, an analyst who closely follows the US, is with us, and in a moment we're hoping to be joined by Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, former Indian diplomat. Vivek Mishra, welcome back to Global Lens. First and foremost, what do you make of the racist, xenophobic, anti-immigrant tirade that Trump and his close supporters launched into on Sunday, giving the Democrats and all of Trump's critics a handle to attack him with, saying, here's a man who admires Hitler, who, according to Kamala Harris, is an unhinged, unstable fascist, and now he is instilling this morbid anti-immigrant fear in all Americans in the hope to be re-elected to the White House. And then editorials have been written in the United States suggesting that this is the most extreme closing argument that has ever been made in US history. What do you make of it?
So, as we are closing on to the final photo finish between the two candidates, I think you're going to see more of this. There is a sense in the Republican Party that the Kamala campaign has stepped up the heat on Trump going into the elections and targeting his mental ability and his physical capacity to be able to serve as the next president. And I think to some extent you're seeing some of the retaliatory steps by the Republican nominee. But I think what happened in Madison Square yesterday was really a culmination of some of the frustrations that underlie the Republican campaign. Madison Square is, of course, one of the largest gatherings that happened for the Republican Party, and therefore you had to see, or the Republicans were preparing for this culmination of their rhetoric. So I think in that sense, you've seen that one of the most severe attacks on the Kamala Harris campaign and calling names and have sort of come out in last night's or last evening's gathering. I think also because it was a 6.5, 7 hours gathering at Madison Square, so the Republican Party was looking at the Madison Square gathering as one of the most fundamental ways in which they could swing some of the voters that are not yet cut by the Republican sway, and New York being Trump's home ground in the sense that it's his business town. I think this was a major appeal to the Republicans and to some of the undecided voters as to how the urban areas are becoming a mess. And he called the United States and a country which has already been taken or been colonized by these immigrants. So I think as we near the date, we are going to see more of this.
Okay, so I want to ask you a follow-up question on this. On not just the shrill anti-immigrant rhetoric, but the language that was used at Madison Square Garden on Sunday. Now, Trump has already in the past described America as a garbage can for the world. Yesterday, he said the United States is an occupied country. Then, some of the others who spoke before him, for instance, David Rem, called Kamala Harris the Antichrist, the devil. He lashed out at Hillary Clinton, calling her unprintable names. Comedian Tony Hinchcliffe called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Like I said, the kind of abuses that were hurled at Hillary Clinton cannot even be repeated on this show, many of them by radio host Sid Rosenberg. And then this man goes on to say you've got homeless people sleeping on their own feces on a bench in Central Park, and then he went on to hurl abuses at immigrants. The question that many are asking now in the US is, could this kind of invective actually play into the hands of Kamala Harris? Could it scare away not just some of the fence-sitters, but perhaps even a segment of Trump's support base who may otherwise be in agreement with his hardline brand of politics, but would probably find this revolting?
Definitely, it is going in a domain where it seems like the narrative is totally unhinged from the Republican side. I think the ad hominem attacks that have happened in the recent past have become further reflective of what's the frustrations on either side is, but particularly among the Republicans who have, as you said, called out names and invectives and abuses. It also sort of it also is reflective of some of the very unaware campaign situation within, or a symbol of unawareness in the sense that calling Puerto Rico a garbage island or things like that. So I think it's very difficult and hard to measure on what percentage of that population will shift, if at all. But to my mind, I have a little skepticism that some of the voters might shift to Democrats because the trends have only shown that people like Black men, Hispanic men are gravitating towards Trump for whatever reason. And furthermore, it is also difficult to measure if that will happen because Trump in his whole campaign has focused vertically on the campaign as opposed to laterally in the case of Kamala Harris. And what I mean is that you've seen that Kamala Harris is also looking at, her campaign has actually brought in a lot of women, a lot of undecided voters, and especially the youth because of her policy campaigns and campaign promises. But you haven't seen that in Trump. Trump has a consolidated vote bank which goes vertical instead of lateral. So he has consolidated certain pockets even further strongly than he earlier had. So, for example, smaller pockets in Midwest where people actually think he's godsend for this election, and because he survived the assassination attempt, that has been concretized. So it'll be very difficult to see if some of this shift happens from the Republicans to the Democrats, but the peripheral voters among the Republicans could sway because this narrative is really going out of hand.
Is going out of hand. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, welcome back to Global Lens. America is an occupied country. There's been an immigrant invasion into the United States. Kamala Harris is the Antichrist, the devil. Hillary Clinton has been called unprintable names. Illegals and homeless people sleep on their own feces. Puerto Rico is a floating island of garbage. As you know, these are not my words. These are words used by Donald Trump and his band of supporters at a massive rally at Madison Square Garden in the heart of New York, which, by the way, is home to a huge section of Puerto Rican population in the United States. Would it be correct to say that this unabashed, bitter, racist, xenophobic outburst is not just a bizarre and out of control attempt at instilling a strong anti-immigrant fear in Americans, but one that may actually end up driving away a lot of people from Trump, many of the fence-sitters, and perhaps even some Trump supporters who could be thinking today, well, he does sound unhinged. This is not what we signed up for.
Neha, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. Surprisingly, Donald Trump is ahead in the sort of reckonings which some of the betting channels have opened. In other words, there are many indications that his terrible rhetoric and that which is also used by his aides, by his supporters. That sort of rhetoric is actually getting him votes, because such is the atmosphere which is now prevailing in the United States elections, that things have really gone bad. But surprisingly, as I said, some of this rhetoric seems to be appealing to voters, particularly the sort of right extreme voters which who support Donald Trump. Now, let me say that by and large, the average American voter is approaching the presidential elections with a lot of unease about what might follow. There are fears that there could be political violence, and that there could be attempts to overturn the election results, because that is the sort of trend which is now being more and more evident. And I must say that almost 40% of American voters are believed to be saying that they are very concerned about violent attempts to overturn the election results after the November election is over. So in other words, there are lots of questions, there's a lot of anxiety, there is a lot of trepidation over how things are going to pan out. And this ugly rhetoric which is being heard, particularly from the Trump camp, is something which is symptomatic of the prevailing atmosphere.
Right, that does paint a very, very ominous picture indeed. And I think if that scenario were to come to pass, it would be a matter of grave concern, not just for America and all those who cherish American democracy, but indeed for the entire world. We certainly don't need the United States of America to turn into a banana republic. Let me take this to Nirmal Abraham. Nirmal Abraham, this isn't the first time that Trump and his supporters have launched a tirade against immigrants in that country, illegal or not. That doesn't really seem to be of much relevance to them. But the kind of things that have been said at Madison Square Garden, particularly the way Puerto Ricans were mocked, it was referred to as a floating island of garbage by one of Trump's supporters. Now, fact is that the statement was made in New York City, which is home to the largest Puerto Rican population on the US mainland. 500,000 Puerto Ricans also live in battleground Pennsylvania, where incidentally Kamala Harris campaigned on Sunday. My question to you is, while you do expect shrill rhetoric in the home stretch of an election campaign, hasn't it all spun out of control? With this kind of rhetoric, do you think Trump is managing to consolidate his support base, or is he in fact scaring away some of those people who may otherwise have considered voting for him? And also, as the ambassador pointed out, doesn't this actually paint a very scary potential scenario for what may come after the votes have been counted in the United States?
Okay, well, first of all, let me start by saying Donald Trump is Donald Trump, and the way he says, so you and I would probably tell people we don't like you. He would instead say, we hate you. That's what he would say. So a different choice of words is what I would say. But I think if you look at the performance, and again, about Puerto Rico being a garbage can or whatever that he mentioned, was a comedian. So I think if you take it in that sense, again, even in that sense, I'm not saying that it is right to say that, but it was a comedian. Probably he
Trump, he spoke on behalf of Trump. Trump offered him the platform.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to say is, regardless of what he says, if you look at what has happened in the last 2 months, I think the support for Trump has been growing largely, not just among Republicans, not just among people who are on the fence, also among Democrats. And I wouldn't specifically say the last 2 months, I would take the last 2 years for that. So, for example, the black votes. So we always tend to say that he's racist, but when you look at the data, you can see that the support from black voters has actually doubled for Trump in the last 4 years. If he was racist, how could that happen is question number one. Number two, once when he said that Mexicans, we will build a wall, we don't want Mexicans here, and he meant illegal Mexicans. And initially it backfired, but towards the end, now when you looked at the recent data, 49% of Mexicans supported Trump compared to 38% for Kamala. That's also interesting. And hardcore Democrats such as Tulsi Gabbard, who is a war veteran, who was also a Democratic presidential nominee once in 2020, who did a pretty good job in debating Kamala Harris in 2020. She has come out in support of Trump. RFK, Robert Kennedy, who was a nephew of John F. Kennedy, who was probably the best Democratic president of all time, also came out in support of Donald Trump. Joe Rogan, who once said he will never give Trump a platform to speak or support him, and who once vehemently supported voting for Bernie Sanders, finally gave Trump a platform and even gave him a friendly interview. So if what we think is right, why is this happening is my question, because this is what really confuses me as well, because maybe something is going right from his end, or maybe something is going wrong from Kamala's end, because the border, for instance, is a huge issue in states such as Arizona, because Arizona shares a border with Mexico, and that's where this issue could heat up. It's a swing state. But even then, if you look at Arizona, people are willing to support Trump because in the last 4 years, close to 11 million people have, encroached the place or even come in illegally, which people don't like because they're also enjoying benefits. I'm not saying, look, I think there is a clear difference between legal immigrants and illegal immigrants. People who go from India after the whole process of waiting for 5, 6, or maybe even 10 years, waiting in lines, doing all the documentation, ensuring that there is no criminal record. There is a difference between that category of people and people who can just walk through a wall or walk through a gate and get to the United States and enjoy the benefits that are paid from the taxpayers' money. This is what upsets people. So I think when you look at the results and the surveys, something must be going right for Trump. Otherwise, he wouldn't gain such support.
You know, it's very interesting. You've rattled off a long list of names of people who have switched sides and are now supporting Trump. I can give you a very long list of names from the Republicans who have gone and joined forces with Kamala Harris. If you want to hear big names of stars and celebrities, well, from Beyonce to Eminem to Taylor Swift, they've all endorsed Kamala Harris. And you're right. There is a difference between legal immigrants and illegal immigrants. However, the trouble is the kind of arguments that are being made by the Republicans, the kind of invective that we are hearing from that side seems to erase that very crucial distinction. And therein lies the problem. Every immigrant is being projected as a villain in the great American story. Let me take this back to Vivek Mishra. Vivek Mishra isn't that part of the problem here. The argument and the rhetoric that's being made by Donald Trump and his supporters, it's almost as if being an immigrant is a crime. He's using this term almost as, a term of abuse. The distinction between those who've legally migrated to that country, people who work hard, pay their taxes, and those who may be undocumented, who may have crossed over illegally, you'd almost think that distinction is being erased by Trump and his band of supporters, given the kind of invective that we are hearing.
Yeah, I mean, the United States historically, as we all know, has been, one of the most vibrant sort of countries which have grown up on the back of immigration and continues to do so. And that's why in many ways, they call themselves a meritocracy, in the sense that you can come here and live your American dream. But as you said, the blurring of the line between what it means to be, and there is a big ground. So some are asylum seekers, some have just, entered and are in the process of gaining their residency and green card holders and then legal citizens. So I think that huge ground, as you said, has been sort of narrowed into one understanding of immigrants being very hostile to this country, and until and unless you're American citizens, it is going to be very difficult for the Republican power, especially for the Trump administration, to absorb or at least have a perspective which is non-hostile to you. So I think that sort of blurring the line has been problematic. But I think I would also go to some of the points made by my predecessor here, the former speaker. So I think it is an important question as to where this debate is taking us, right? So it is a question for the voters in the US of a prioritization, whether, you know, they should be focused on a debate which seems like a racist debate, or whether they should focus on questions of which deal very pertinently and very pragmatically on an everyday basis. So, for example, groceries, economy, the state of economy, etc. If you look at the statistics, Biden administration has actually brought down the inflation from about 40% to a very low number right now. But all of that doesn't sell with the American public, and there are many reasons for that, because the Biden administration went hard on big investments like the Infrastructure Reduction Act and the Chips and the Sciences Act, which doesn't cut with the normal voters. For them, the grocery prices are still high, and therefore that could be one of the reasons why they're voting a certain way. So I think the ground situation is sort of away from the mega policies that have taken place. And therefore, it is not a question of for the voters in the US, it's not a question of whether this is a racist debate at all.
Okay, well, to a lot of people, including myself, it does look like an extremely racist and xenophobic debate. And, you talked about grocery prices. Yes, Kamala Harris has also acknowledged that it's a concern for a very large number of Americans. And you know what? Trump has found a way to even blame that on the immigrants. That's the kind of rhetoric that we are hearing in the home stretch of this election. Let me take this back to Ambassador Prabhu Dayal. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, Vivek says that the lines have been blurred. I would say the lines have not been blurred. The entire distinction between hardworking, legal immigrants who pay their taxes and are as American as somebody like Donald Trump, and those who have crossed over illegally, it seems has been completely erased by Trump and his supporters. Today, everything that Donald Trump and his supporters say seem to suggest that all of the problems and the troubles that the American people are facing today, including high grocery prices, are thanks to the immigrants. Now, if this is not another level of white supremacy, racism, and unprecedented xenophobia, I don't know what is. The question is, to what extent do you think this narrative is selling, and how much is it likely to force Kamala Harris to take a tougher and tougher stance on the issue of immigration, because we've already seen a shift in her stance in recent months. She's sounding much more hawkish now on immigration than she did earlier.
Well, I think that Trump has been trying to hit out at illegal migrants. And in fact, if you recall, a few days ago, his vice presidential nominee, Vance, also said that the open borders which America was maintaining earlier had negatively impacted education for children in the state. And he said that, for instance, in Pennsylvania, there were thousands of children in schools there who don't even speak English. So really speaking, the criticism was intended to be directed against illegal immigrants. But there is a lot of racism which is permeating the election rhetoric of Donald Trump. For instance, he has been targeting the Black community. And Kamala Harris challenged Trump to clarify what he means by a Black job, because it is definitely something which has a racist overtones. He has been using this term quite often in his election speeches. Now, a previous speaker, I think it was Mr. Abraham, I think he was correct in saying that at the election rally of Donald Trump, which was held in the Madison Square, it was a comedian, a stand-up comedian, I think Tony Hitchcliffe or something like that was his name, who had used the term floating island of garbage for Puerto Rico. But in all fairness, the Trump campaign distanced itself, and Trump's advisors said that his views did not reflect those of President Trump or the campaign. So there is a lot of, mudslinging going on, name-calling, but by and large, let's look at some of the most serious aspects. Kamala Harris is positioning herself as a champion of social justice, equality, and women's rights. She is aiming to engage voters through her policies on health care and climate change, and also perhaps trying to focus on the marginalized communities. On the other hand, Donald Trump is focusing on issues like the economy. You know, the economy is facing serious challenges in the United States. Immigration, and in this context, he's focusing on illegal immigrants and law and order. There are issues relating to law and order which have been troubling the American people. So he appeals to his voter base, which incidentally is quite a dedicated voter base. And he has been trying to establish that a return to the policies of his administration would benefit the American people. So if the debate stays focused on serious issues, it's one thing. But as you pointed out, Neha, there is a lot of decline in the sort of language that is being used. And that is what is causing a lot of anxiety among American voters.
One can hardly blame them for feeling anxious, especially given what happened on 6 January 2021. Okay, Nirmal Abraham, wrap up this discussion for us. It's interesting. Joe Biden has hit out at Elon Musk, who is, of course, as we know, one of the most high-profile Trump supporters, saying Elon Musk worked illegally in the US in the 1990s. Now, he was quoting a report that's appeared in the Washington Post, which suggests that Elon Musk actually lacked the required legal status to establish his company. Therefore, pointing out his hypocrisy, Biden says that wealthiest man in the world turned out to be an illegal worker in the US. He was supposed to be in school when he came on a student visa. He wasn't in school, he was violating the law, and he is talking about these illegals coming our way. And also, another fun fact, talking about immigrants. Donald Trump and his running mate JD Vance, neither of them would have wives today if it wasn't for immigrants in the United States. I'm sure you'd agree.
I agree if they're legal immigrants. I won't agree if they're illegal immigrants. But Elon Musk, I mean, if it's true, it's sad. But we can't go back in time to change. But what he's done for the US and for the world, I think, has been quite phenomenal, especially. And in fact, he has actually boosted climate change, corrections, right? The first man to build an EV empire. Tesla became the first company or the largest EV manufacturer in the world, now just overtaken by BYD. So the things that he's done for US, I think you could forget that. But if it's right, yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Biden. That's the point here as well, because when you have people coming in lakhs, not in hundreds of thousands, in lakhs, and stealing jobs is something that a term that Trump would use. I wouldn't say stealing jobs, but they do the kind of jobs that either legal Mexicans or legal black people would do. So in a way, yeah, it is true. But the other biggest problem that people faced in the recent months is that taxpayers' money has been going into them. They've been accommodated in hotel rooms. All of these kind of worked against Kamala is what I'm saying. I'm in no way or shape or form supporting the language that Trump is using. I think if anything backfires for Trump at any point of time in his life, it is always the language that he uses. So it's unfortunate that he speaks like that, but Trump is Trump. You can't change him. But as far as policy is concerned, if you compare the period 2016 to 2020 and 2020 to 2024, I would say Trump's policies, especially economic policies and the policies on war as well as world peace, has been quite phenomenal compared to this regime. So I think that's one of the reasons why people are supporting. And again, people are also understanding the difference between legal and illegal immigration now, because in 2016 it was easier to criticize him on immigration. Now,
interesting, you just used the word regime, which is usually used in the context of dictators, and this is the very criticism that has been leveled by the Biden administration against Donald Trump, that the man is a wannabe tyrant who admires Hitler, and he would want to have his own regime and not a government, and the kind of generals that Hitler had, allegedly in Trump's own words, if you go by what John Kelly said. But I'm completely out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a contest that promises to be a fascinating one, and one that the entire world is watching with bated breath. On that note, Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, Vivek Mishra, Nirmal Abraham, thanks very much to all of you for joining me on Global Lens tonight. All right, let's now turn our attention to the growing conflict in the Middle East. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has given a measured response to Israeli strikes on the country, saying the attack should not be exaggerated or downplayed, while refraining from pledging immediate retaliation. Meanwhile, Israel has said it targeted military sites in several regions of Iran on Saturday in retaliation for Iranian attacks, including a barrage of 200 ballistic missiles that were fired towards Israel on the 1st of October.
Leaders of Israel and Iran on Sunday appeared to give conflicting accounts of Israel's attack on Iran a day earlier, with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying the airstrikes, quote, hit hard Iran's defenses and missile production, and Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei saying that narrative was exaggerated. Netanyahu spoke at a memorial service for soldiers killed in the Israel-Hamas war on Sunday.
In the early morning hours of Saturday, we fulfilled our promise. The Air Force attacked throughout Iran. We hit hard Iran's defense capabilities and its ability to produce missiles that are aimed at us. The attack in Iran was precise and powerful and achieved all of its objectives.
The heavily armed arch-enemies have engaged in a cycle of retaliatory moves against each other for months. Saturday's long-anticipated strike involved scores of fighter jets bombing targets near the capital Tehran and in western provinces. At least 4 soldiers were killed. The attack came after an Iranian missile barrage directed at Israel on October 1st, much of which Israel said was downed by its air defenses. Khamenei on Sunday said the country was weighing its response while disputing Israel's account.
The second point is related to this evil move that Israel made here 2 nights ago. Well, they made a mistake. They, of course, exaggerated it. Their exaggeration is wrong, but note that downplaying it is also wrong. Saying no, there was nothing, it wasn't important, and this is also wrong. The calculation error of the Zionist regime needs to be disrupted. They have a calculation error regarding Iran.
With warfare raging in Gaza and Lebanon, direct confrontation between Israel and Iran risks spiraling into a wider regional conflict. But a day after the airstrikes, there was no sign they would spark further escalation. A senior administration official for U.S. President Joe Biden said the attacks were a proportional response to Iran's earlier attacks with low risk of civilian harm, while Biden has called for a halt to the escalation.
All right, our next story is from the US and it has an India connect. In a recent development, the US deported a group of Indian nationals who had entered the country illegally. The operation carried out by the US Department of Homeland Security saw a chartered flight return these individuals to India on the 22nd of October. According to the Department of Homeland Security, this deportation underscores the department's commitment to working with international partners, including India, to curb irregular migration and human smuggling. Indian government sources have confirmed that this deportation was the result of active collaboration with the US on migration and mobility. While the DHS did not disclose the exact number of people on the flight, it emphasized the importance of legal migration avenues and warned against falling prey to smugglers' false promises. All right, let's now get you some details of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. Well, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has actually expressed high hopes for Prime Minister Narendra Modi's potential role in ending the Ukraine war. In an interview with an Indian newspaper, Zelenskyy said, and I quote, "Prime Minister Modi can influence the end of the Ukraine war. This is the huge value of him in any conflict. This is the huge value of India." Zelenskyy suggested that negotiations could take place in India with Prime Minister Modi playing a pivotal role. Regarding Mr. Modi's readiness to work towards peace in Ukraine, Zelenskyy called for concrete actions rather than just words. He emphasized, and I quote, "Mr. Modi is the Prime Minister of a really huge country. Such a country cannot just say we're interested in the end of the war. PM Modi can influence the end of the war, blocking of Russian economy, blocking of cheap energy resources, blocking of defense industrial complex of Russia will lead to a decrease in the capacity of Moscow to wage wars against us." Zelenskyy has also appealed to Prime Minister Modi for assistance in the return of Ukrainian children allegedly taken to Russia. "You can force Putin to bring back Ukrainian children. Prime Minister Modi can use his influence and tell Putin, just give us 1,000 Ukrainian children who can be taken back to Ukraine. Let Prime Minister Modi bring back at least 1,000 Ukrainian children," Zelenskyy said. The conflict in Ukraine has intensified, particularly in the Donbass region, where Russian forces have made significant advances. The upcoming US presidential elections have added further uncertainty for Ukraine, especially if a victory for Trump leads to reduced American support. The US is, of course, a primary military aid supplier to Kiev, and any reduction would be a major challenge for the war-torn country. Well, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. Thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow.
Cooking is an act of love. The first act of love we receive from our mothers in the families.
Modern Indian food is all about contemporary and innovative approach to traditional Indian cooking.
Representation it's also important, no?